we think we've done a pretty good job of trying to beat the drum of automated governance. So a little bit of a backstory there. Back in early 2019, the director of engineering at Liatrio at the time, Casey Lee, he demoed an early version of automated governance at DeliveryConf.
All right, everybody, welcome to our second episode. I want to welcome you and welcome Robert Kelly of Liatrio here. Robert's the VP of Technology Enablement at Liatrio. I'm going to let him talk about himself, but this is a really neat podcast that I think we have going on today. As you know, the Investments Unlimited book talks about an automated governance system, and Robert has some very interesting insights on these types of systems and how they can be built. So I'm going to try to do my best to keep it quiet, and I'm just Robert, man, tell us a little bit something about you. Let the guests know who you are.
All right, real quick little intro. Robert Kelly, VP Technology Enablement. Thanks, Bill. Thanks for the intro. Good to meet you, Clarrissa, as well.
Nice to meet you too.
So thanks for having me today. I'm really excited about the conversation. So Liatrio is a professional services firm. I've been with Liatrio for about 8 years. We partner with large, complex, often heavily regulated enterprises. We help them with the cloud and modernization journey that they're on. We focus on digital value delivery. So this is everything it takes to build and ship software and digital services, from helping teams break down the work that they're doing, improving developer experience, platform engineering, continuous delivery, all the automation around securing software supply chain, all of this stuff. Really passionate about everything there, DevOps, cloud enablement. So the things we've been doing for quite some time really are just helping facilitate shipping software, and big regulated enterprise organizations are kind of our home, right? So really looking to get into some of that discussion today and see where we can go with the conversation.
Perfect. So at the end of the day, shipping software, doing software delivery for highly regulated organizations. I think this is perfect because I remember, and we talked about in a bit of our pre-brief today, that you've built automated governance systems and helped build them for clients, but yet to a large degree, you haven't spent much of your lifetime in the auditing world and working with a lot of auditors. Is that correct?
That's right. So working directly with auditors has been a little bit of a, oh, well, that's going to happen. I have been part of audits, but it's always been a little bit of a, hey, I'm one level removed from an auditor's world. And it's always been like, okay, well, there's someone asking for some information here. You're going to prove you've met these requirements or the compliance, and then give us some of that evidence, and we'll get back to you later. Yeah, that's usually how it is. And I had some of that experience when I was managing GameStop.com as a manager e-commerce. That's been about 10 years ago. And but since then, it's been working on, hey, how do we facilitate getting some of this data going so that maybe that'd be easier. But maybe we'll get into that conversation.
Yeah, I'm excited for that one because I'm eager to see what Clarissa's questions are for this.
I've got questions.
Yeah. Excellent.
It's good.
That's what I do for a living.
Good conversation of learning. Well, I just want to kick it off with this one big question. So, as some folks who have read the book know, it talks about an automated governance system that was built here. The authors told their stories in a fictional way, but from my understanding, you and Liatrio, I'm pronouncing it right, Liatrio, right?
You got it, Liatrio.
You and Liatrio actually had a bit of a hand in helping some of the system that is talked about in Investments Unlimited and helping people build these systems elsewhere. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's what I think. We've done a pretty good job of trying to beat the drum of automated governance. So a little bit of a backstory there. Back in early 2019. The director of engineering at Liatrio at the time, Casey Lee, he demoed an early version of automated governance at DeliveryConf. So the goal there was to show how we could bring governance to Kubernetes and cloud native environments. This is something we thought was important. Really, our customers were new to cloud native or Kubernetes. There were few, if any, of our customers running Kubernetes in production at the time. And, really, we wanted to show them sort of the art of the possible. So at that time, we were already heavily engaged with a large bank in their digital transformation, leading dojos and partnering with teams to help them get better at delivery. And we shared the same demo with their leadership, which included one of the future authors of the book, Investments Unlimited, right? They were obviously interested. Automated governance was becoming more of a, I won't say a buzzword, but I think that was being invented at the time. That phrasing, or that, sort of what that was. But we had a point of view there. So I do believe that inspired the bank to start their journey and really start building that system of automated governance. Since we were already engaged there, folks from our team moved over to help them build that solution and the technology behind it and get moving in that direction. Yeah. So
Robert, you mentioned, this was being invented. It was kind of maybe not a buzzword yet, but sounded like something that could become a buzzword. That for me is typically a flag of asking a question, what problem are you trying to solve with this? A lot of times we'll go to the next coolest tool or the next buzzword because it's the thing to do. But can you expand a little bit more on either in that particular instance, or I know you've got other experiences with automated governance implementations. What problem were you or are you trying to solve with this?
No, absolutely. Right. We hope that there's some value behind it. Right. So really much of that effort in software delivery is manual. I think that has been traditionally, right? So that includes all of the testing, separate security scans, and large enterprises. These things can be just separate activities, right? And trying to piece together sort of the proof that these things happened and attaching them to ServiceNow tickets. Anyway, there's a lot of the existing processes that made the delivery of software in these large organizations just slow and just get slower over time. And really wanted to make that easier, just to reduce time, the lead time that really ends up being extended by maybe multiple days or weeks in some cases. So really trying to decrease the lead time for these delivery teams. And that's probably where we started, is like making this easier for delivery teams and just to get work done, and maybe not specifically from, hey, we need to solve this audit or compliance thing. And that just ends up being, well, something that needs to get done. Yeah.
Which I love that you said that, because it should never, in my opinion, it should never start with, we need to get this audit thing done or this compliance thing done, because the audit things and the compliance things should be about managing risk for the organization. So the end all be all, maybe an audit finding or a compliance issue came out of an unmanaged risk and is causing these types of things, but really it should anchor back to that risk. So I love that it was more reducing lead time for those delivery teams. And I know in Investments Unlimited, it kind of started with the MRIA from the regulators, but then as they started to peel back the layers, they understood what the risks were. So always trying to anchor back to risks. I have another question. Sorry, Bill, I'm just jumping right in with things as Robert's saying things. One of the challenges that people that I talk to from highly regulated industries, and I've got experience in those industries as well, is when we're trying to do new things and change the way that we're working, there's sometimes an apprehension internally, thinking like, no, we can't do this because the regulators won't let us, or because we're in a highly regulated organization. The organizations that you were working with, did you encounter any of that? And if yes, how did you overcome that?
So absolutely, it's real. It's every day. I think that's sort of an ongoing discussion, and I don't think that you can overcome it in a short amount of time. I don't think we have overcame the sort of that obstacle that's there. It's because you've got to build trust over time. And I think that's what the goal of the solution and the approach is, to really build up that system of trust and building trust. And you've got to show that, and it's not going to be an overnight thing, right? And also, it isn't something that you can just go in and change en masse across the organization. It's not something that's going to be, well, hey, we've suddenly flip a switch and everything is great. So you've got to start chipping away, and some of these teams that look a certain way or deliver maybe a modern product, they may be able to have a little bit more of an automated solution. And that's hard if you say if just a portion of the organization has something, that looks modern or is sort of this new trusted system of delivery. Anyway, stop talking about that. Ultimately, it's an ongoing thing and it hasn't been solved, right? So it's going to keep going. That journey is, we're just on the journey.
Yep. And I also love how you said a journey.
Thanks. Yeah, it is. It is a bit of a journey, and we've used other words to describe that, right? But it's not easy, and it's we're talking about changing the way people work, and I think that it's just going to be a little bit of an uphill battle, but we hope it gets easier. I think we are proving out some great new ways to make it easier and bring everybody into the solution. Yeah,
And you're not just changing the way they work, but changing the way they think as well.
that's
and
right.
think about work.
There's a little bit of hearts and minds there, right? Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I want to dig into, as you're building these, and especially with some of your existing clients. So far, you're not quite working with the internal auditing arm just yet. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think again, it really ends up being preparation for those things. And
Gotcha.
some of the folks we're working with today, a couple of large airlines, one of those airlines, there's a certain all of this would be say, hey, we've got to put this in front of the internal audit teams at some point, and we're going to give them a dashboard and a nice way to see these things and see that these controls are met, and we're going to be able to have proof of these things be met, and the hope is that will be used, but again, it's one of these, it's not, audit is not every day today, right? I think I have some questions about, well, should it be? How should it be thought of, right? I think that Clarrissa might have some opinions there, but it's not. And they're not thinking about it every day. We can think about maybe meeting some of these controls, but I think it might be ripe for change.
I think it is. Sorry, go ahead, Bill.
No, I want to lead into that. It's like, I'll just ask the one question, put you on the spot a little bit. Why haven't you started working with what's preventing you and your clients from working with the internal auditing from the beginning to design this?
Well, a lot of times it's our stakeholders. Audit's not asking us to come in and fix IT, right? IT is asking us to come in and fix audit. That would be how I'd look at it, right? So it's coming from a very IT focused point of view. We're going to help here, and hopefully that's going to enable the teams to be, have the proof they need to improve audit later. Now we're right in the middle of this, like making this a real thing. But for that side of the equation, the right side of the bringing that auditing capability, or really continuous compliance, is probably what I'd be thinking of there, and helping both sides understand. But we've got to show IT really first this is possible, and then we'd be able to show, hey, look, whomever is going to be sitting on audit and compliance, this is actually how this works. So I think we've just got to start moving that ball and helping spread what we think to the rest of the organization. Yeah.
And I wonder.
Go ahead, Phil. Go for it. I think we're probably going the same way, because I want to hear your questions to Clarrissa. So I'm going to step back for a second, because I feel like there's a very interesting conversation. So Robert, you've built things for IT to help to solve an audit problem, and to a large degree, audit hasn't really been involved, and that's completely understandable from a lot of organizations. Like, I think this is going to be the normal path. Like in the book, we talk about people co-oping, but the reality is you have to plant a seed before you start to grow a tree in most of these organizations, and that seed is this initial automated governance application, usually driven by IT and their problem. But as you said there, how would you? And I'm just like if we role play this out, maybe it's your questions, like Clarrissa, you and Robert, and this one, how would you then start to have a conversation? Like, say somebody's built this initial one, you've built it, and maybe you've had some of these conversations, but and I'm eager the questions too that you would ask Clarrissa, because I have a feeling the questions you're going to ask her are probably similar to how do we help adopt, scale, and push this through the organization. But I could be wrong on that. So I want to pass it over to you two. Yeah, go for it.
Sure. Hey, Clarrissa, did you have a question first before I ask mine?
I had lots of questions, but I'm going to pause and I'm going to have you ask your questions first, and I'll
Uh,
probably ask back as we go.
let me try to frame this question. There's a little bit of a statement, so I'll try to get to this question. So I'll give a little bit of a backstory. So recently, hey, we're working through some of these solutions, bringing a little bit of we'll just say the architecture to the IT teams, and say this is what we're going to build, and say, well, ultimately, this has got to help audit. This has got to help us get through audit later. Can we sit down with internal audit and go through what that process looks like, or can we sit with them as they're working with one of the delivery teams to to see what this actually looks like? Well, and we said, well, no, we'd really rather you not. We'd really rather you not go sit with audit, and we really no. It turns out there's nobody actually going through an audit right now anyway. And it's one of these things that the IT org really dances around. And I guess I'm asking is that number one, is that normal? And is it is there a better way to ask to meet with these folks and to get that conversation started?
Yeah, so one of my favorite questions to ask my team when we identify potential gaps is, what's the risk? And so I'd ask the same question here: is what's the risk of talking to audit and bringing them in, and what's the risk of not? So
Right.
you said about preparing for the audits, developing these dashboards, and hoping that it's right for the auditors. And my leader tells me a lot, hope is not a strategy. So
That's right. That's right.
I'm watching this movie and I'm seeing you're putting in all this work, and think of it from a software development perspective.
Mm-hmm.
You put all this in and you develop all this software and you create all these cool features, and then you finally eventually deliver it to the client or the end user. What if it's not right? Wouldn't it be
Right.
better to get those feedback loops earlier?
We think so.
Yeah.
Right. And not to cut you off, but we genuinely know that the proofs of these controls being met is going to be valuable.
Mm-hmm.
We do believe that, and we're sure that that's going to be helpful. But we really do want to know how exactly, and to make it better. It's like I think we've got to have that conversation. We're solving the wrong problems. So we get maybe requirements. They're third level is like, this is what it is, and we've got to meet the controls, got to show proof, and this is how we're going to do it. But I do think audit should be involved if this is what the goal is, to meet those
Yep.
requirements, right?
And you said you think you'll be valuable. Who are they going to be valuable to?
They're valuable to anybody who's a stakeholder in sort of the trust of the software delivery system, right? This SDLC, or we'll call it the platform. If you want to trust that things are being built how they're expected to be built, the way we say they're supposed to be built, and they're secure, and they're really verifiable. We use the word attestations. We've got attestations for all the things we expected to happen during the delivery system, and I mean, I can go all the things that we might be checking for. Those things need to be accounted for in that, to have that sort of trustable proof for that audit eventually. But really, it's to reduce risk, right? So we're trying to build trust to reduce, so that everyone knows we really are reducing risk.
Which, again, I love that you said that, because a lot of times people say valuable for the auditors. And again, shouldn't start with what's valuable for the auditors. It's what's valuable for the organization and for the business. And then that in turn will be valuable for the auditors, but only if the auditors understand what is valuable to the business.
Right.
And so part of that is bringing them into the conversation earlier, so they know, here's what's most important to the organization. Here's the technology piece of that supports that's important. Here's the risks there, and here's how we're showing that we're managing those risks appropriately.
Yeah. So for me, it really is, we're doing these things so we can accelerate software delivery and just remove the manual toil that may be involved in other ways, right? So for us, I look at building trust, or let's say increasing security, or the reducing risk as a way to accelerate delivery. And I think that's I'm hoping that's what everybody that comes to the table is looking at it the same way.
I love that.
I want to summarize what I just think I heard from both of you as you went through that this conversation is if I'm trying to push my automated governance solution, so first off, I think a lot of people listening to this podcast, they may think, okay, these companies have automated solutions, but the reality is how integrated are they with internal audit? Based upon, Robert, sort of your experience, they're actually not really integrated. So while we have this automated governance solution, it's sort of sitting there by itself waiting to prove its value to the organization.
Certainly while it's being developed, and I think there's limited interaction because in general, there's limited interaction with audit and the dev teams. There's just limited interaction. So it's yeah, I think that it's definitely not a daily thing.
So then it really comes down to the tech team. So the person, maybe they think of themselves like a pseudo product owner or the visionary for this automated governance system inside the organization. It is now incumbent upon them as they go and they go down this route. It's now incumbent on them to sell and market it inside the organization to get the internal audit on board as well. So I've talked to some tech folks that they build these things and they don't realize that, and then it hits them. They're like, I built this, now I have to sell it. And is that accurate? That's sort of what I'm hearing here. And Clarrissa, from you, I'm hearing
I think there's a little bit of both. Well, let's say this. They're certainly trying to do what's needed to meet what they think is important. Like, hey, we've got to meet the proof of controls. If they're talking about, hey, I've got a SOC 2 compliance, that I've got to meet. We know those things that hey, we've got to be able to prove these things. We know we've got a security policy, and we've got an information security policy, access control policies, software secrets management policies, change management policies. They know that they can check the box, or they can prove that they're following the policies by implementing this, and they know that's good. And I think where this should be going is that enough, right? I think we're looking at it like, well, we're just trying to meet these specific compliance goals and we have a list of targets or controls to make, and the system can do that. So that everyone knows that's good, but it's like, are we having the right conversation? And is it? I'm certain they'll be able to use they're using these things to prove these controls are met. And that's fine. But I don't think that's enough. I think that there's something missing here. And I think that's what I'm trying to get at. Maybe so I'm still, in my journey, right? I'm in my learning journey here. And it's like, I know we're doing great things, and I know we're accelerating delivery here and reducing risk, but I feel like we're still not bringing audit to the table early enough.
Yep. Yeah. So one of the things, Bill, I know you mentioned your book, and I'm going to mention my book. It's about exactly this: is bringing the auditors to the table early and often. And one of the concepts in the book, and again, I borrowed a lot of the things in there from DevOps and from Agile and from Scrum, is auditors and audit clients. So anybody who gets audited at some point or another, or could be subject to an audit, getting them to work together on, I call it a daily basis, because again, borrowing from the Agile Manifesto, but really not waiting for the audit to come around and just hoping that they don't find the things. Because when I hear those things, I think about the perception of audit in that type of an organization is likely, which is pervasive across a lot of different organizations, is the auditors are out to get you. They're just waiting to say, gotcha, found these gaps, and air all the dirty laundry. But in reality, that's not internal audit's goal. That's not their job. Our job is to provide assurance that what you need to be working correctly is working correctly, or telling you that, hey, this thing you really depend on working is not working the way you think it is. Mm-hmm. The other piece of it that a lot of people don't think about is providing advice and consulting services. So there's really two primary types of activities that internal audit organizations can provide. And when I think about what you're talking about here in the stage that you're in now, this could be either what I'm calling more real-time assurance from the auditors. These things that we're putting in, is this managing risk in accordance with the organization's risk tolerance, and what is internal audit's view on that? The other piece of it is more forward-looking advice of, hey, we're thinking about doing these things. Here's the things we're thinking about automating. Internal audit, what are your thoughts on that? And if we go down this path and do this, does it seem enough? Or are we missing something? Or what haven't we thought about? So yeah, definitely bringing the auditors to the table earlier is better, but that is a culture shift in some organizations.
Mhm.
The other piece of it is, if not internal audit, maybe a baby step, because I think we talked about earlier, and maybe it was in our pre-call, was you can't just have like these sweeping changes and like, here we're doing all this and doing it everywhere. It's a journey. It's a mindset change. It is a way of thinking and a way of working.
Right.
What about risk management? They think about the 3 lines model, and you've got your first line in the organization. It's management that owns the risk. They perform the controls. Risk management, setting all those policies. You mentioned the change management policy, the information security policy, all of those. Risk management is typically setting those policies and setting the control requirements or guidelines on here's how you should be managing this risk.
Mhm.
And then internal audit's that independent assurance. So if they're not ready to bring in internal audit, I'd still push for that, but I'm a little biased there. Risk management would also be a great partner to provide that somewhat not quite as independent and objective lens, but still more independent and objective than the developers that are doing that work.
Yeah, and we've got risk management and usually the security organization are heavily involved in the work we're doing, and we trust that they're giving us those requirements, and we're trying to meet those. They're
Yep.
usually pretty heavily involved, and we're usually bringing those folks in earlier. So we fortunately have that, but I still think the audit folks, the dev teams, they don't want to talk to the audit group. So that's just, and I think that's where we're at. We're kind of at that point where it's just time to change that conversation.
And I
Well,
wonder if the conversation is sometimes it's a little intimidating to bring the auditors in when you're talking business. There's that fear that we apparently are incredibly frightening and scary, and something that I think starts to turn the relationship in a positive way is taking the business lens off of it. Eventually, we're going to get there because we do need to talk shop. But coffee, number one, I love coffee. Number two, it's really, really disarming. So,
Mhm.
hey, let's just grab coffee
Yep.
and to start building that relationship. Because again, you don't want to show your entire house to a stranger. But your best friend, yeah, they can see everything. They're not, it's fine. So starting to build that relationship to show that the auditors are people and show the auditors that the developers care about doing a good job too. It's kind of a two-sided thing. So definitely start the conversation and maybe start with something that's a little um, less pressure.
Absolutely. Great advice. Thank you.
well, let me ask Krista, like, Robert, it may have thrown something your way. Like, you talk about some of this coffee stuff. Like, if Robert to go to some of his clients tomorrow, I mean, you just talked about coffee, but like, what would be something he could actively do to bring the technologists and internal audit together? I mean, you could talk about coffee and talk about disarming the business, and Robert, I'd like to hear some of your thoughts in here too. But like, as people are listening, they're probably like, okay, coffee's great, but like, what am I going to talk around coffee? We're not talking about business, or we're not talking about tech, because the internal auditors are most likely not steeped in some of the technology that the developers are. Like, what conversation do they have?
What do they have in common?
Yeah, yeah.
No, and I want to answer that, but I also want to go back, and I think it would be a good segue. Robert, you mentioned trying to solve an audit problem. I think was something that you mentioned.
I'd probably said that. That was probably a bad thing to say.
But to fix the audit, or something that there's a problem or a challenge with audit,
It's
and
to
there's a
prepare.
thing to be solved to repair.
It's
Okay,
prepare for the audit. Yeah,
okay,
prepare for audit is usually what that I would say is one of the goals. Yeah, absolutely.
totally fair. Um, and Bill, to your point, feedback loops. I know we say that a lot in a lot of things, but bring your auditors into feedback loops. And auditors should be bringing, here's my call to the auditors of all the organizations, bring your clients into feedback loops too. So if what they can talk about is, hey, the last time that we were audited, here's some
Mhm.
things that might be better, or hey, I've here's an article or a podcast episode that I found incredibly interesting. Let's talk about that. I also love the idea of sharing, because I love to read books. So I would say Investments Unlimited is a great
Oh yeah,
starting point, because it's
of
a
course.
fun read. I think
Yeah,
it's fun. I'm a little
that's
bit
right.
nerdy too, though. But just talking about and creating that we're all humans and we're all in this together. So finding some sort of common ground, and being okay with them. Like I don't have a background in technology. I've been in my role auditing technology for 5 years, but before that, I had no experience with technology. So I mean, even reading these books, I'm like, okay, I got to Google what this is, and I don't know what that is, or I don't know what they're saying. And somebody said SBOM the other day, and I'm like, oh, I've heard of that, but I actually have no idea what it is or why I would use it. So,
Hmm.
you, while there might another thing that both teams would have in common is, Bill, to answer your question, is a lack of perspective on why the other team is doing what they're doing and the expertise that each of them bring. So I would be talking to my clients, tell me about this automated governance that you're doing. Like, what problem are you trying to solve, and how are you doing that, and how is that even possible? And the clients would be asking me, well, do you have a checklist that you're looking at when you audit? Gosh, I hope not. Um,
Mhm.
but what kind of keeps you up at night, Clarissa, as an auditor, when you're thinking about automated governance and these changes that we're making? So it might seem like two completely different worlds, but they both work for the same organization. So there are common goals and a lot of things to talk about.
It's funny, as I asked that question, I realized I was setting myself up to answer that question, and I didn't realize it. This is where governance engineering comes in, because you're talking about that. What I'm hearing here, like the idea of the governance engineering, taking a software engineering approach to solve governance problems, at its roots in SRE, is the idea of having a specific team that can cross that domain and technical boundary that focuses on this. Robert, as you're doing some of these automated governance implementations, I'll use the term governance engineering team, but have you been creating, or as you've left these solutions, have things been created like small governance engineering teams where it becomes this small team's responsibility to not just enhance, I mean, people always talk about enhancing the software, but to constantly be working with risk and governance, since you mainly work at risk and security, constantly working risk and security to keep the governance solution up to date. Are you seeing that?
I think it's really an ongoing discussion, and we probably would say, we've got this is one of the platforms in looking at it from maybe a platform engineering or platform perspective. Like, governments is one of the core capabilities of the platform. So we think that there should be a team who is making sure that this piece of our platform, and if there's automation and there's engineering around it, that they're treating it like a product, and that means we've got the requirements from security, compliance, risk management, and we're making that available as a service to our teams. And I think that we think that can be on a team on its own, to make sure that because there's generally a lot of this that's got to be extended to a lot of the internal customers and delivery teams. Where it's kind of born is there's usually, it might be called a DevOps team or another platform team, and usually end up managing the larger platform. And this is just one of their jobs, but I think it's slowly becoming something that needs certainly its own attention. We think that there's enough work there, policy as code, and to be able to codify all of these policies, excuse me, and staying on top of it. Really, just I think that there's enough demand there to warrant really honing in on that, keeping that team functioning as a product team. Yeah.
Okay. Nice. All right. Well, I want to get back to you and you guys' questions to each other, because this is really interesting watching you guys, listening to it.
So, Robert, I've got a question for you. You mentioned, and these are my words, not your words, but bringing the auditors in early and often as, kind of a question of, can we do this? And you think we should be doing this. I agree with you. I think you should be doing it. In addition to that, if you had a magic wand, how would you use that? What would the perfect or ideal audit experience look like with regards to automated governance?
Let me maybe this is a long-winded question I have. Maybe I'm going to ask a question, or maybe have a statement that should be a question. So, should it be looked at as audit, or should we be looking at it as that sort of continuous compliance story, and audit makes sure that we're not out of compliance? Or I guess that's what I'm asking. What should it be? how, again, because we're talking about maybe if we look at it as an audit, it's always been this eventual consistency model where the team is eventually going to go through an audit. Maybe that's a question. Should it be that way? What should it look like? For a team, and ultimately, because it's going to look differently in different organizations. And I imagine the internal audit is not always an incredibly large organization to be able to interface with hundreds of development teams. So I'm really looking for this to be something that scales just as to help scale with the rest of the development organization as well.
You got it. And the way we have historically done audits is we come up with our plan for the next 12 months of what we're going to look at, because nothing ever changes in 12 months ever. So that totally works today. Joking. So we used to come up with our plan for the entire year, and then as the time would hit, okay, now we've got this audit that we're going to do, and we would do sample testing and a lot of manual testing and a lot of the problems you were trying to solve with automated governance. We experienced that, but with auditing. So maybe a different scale, but a lot of manual things, a lot of sample testing, and where do we get the evidence from? Sending spreadsheets to our clients, fill this out. We think we're getting the right evidence, probably not the right evidence. That's how we've historically done things, and that probably worked when there weren't as many changes, or there weren't as many, when we'd had these big bang changes to systems instead of small incremental changes. And we as auditors need to modify our approach to be scalable as well. So one of the I don't want to say a buzzword. I think it started as a buzzword, but it's getting some traction, and we're really having to turn it into a reality, is continuous auditing. And continuous auditing isn't necessarily, everyone defines it differently. It doesn't necessarily need to be like absolute continuous, and as soon as a change goes that doesn't comply with policy, we're flagged. It could be periodic, but more frequently than once every 5 years or 4 years or 2 years or however long that requirement is. So as organizations move to more of this continuous compliance model, and that continuous compliance is providing assurance to the key stakeholders that what they need to have happen is happening, and the policies that they need to comply with, they're complying with, or they're not, and they're identifying it sooner or preventing things from going into production that don't comply. So that would be more the continuous compliance. And audit should be shifting to see how can they do some periodic auditing of that, to get comfort that, and I'm going to use these words incorrectly, so bear with me, but whatever's put in place for automated governance, is it set up appropriately? So is it looking at the right policies that should be set there, or is it enforcing the right policies? And how do you make sure that when a policy changes, so the change management policy changes to new requirements, how is the organization making sure that automated governance reflects that?
Right.
And then as an auditor, wanting to understand, how do you make sure that it's doing, so it's designed to do that, but is it actually doing what it's supposed to do? Is it rejecting things that it's supposed to reject and passing things that it's supposed to pass? And then getting comfort with that, and then having more real-time assurance, because you'd probably want to know now rather than 5 years from now whether this is set up appropriately and working appropriately. You're going to want to know in real time. So I definitely think that and it's not just me, this is where the profession is going. We're just trying to figure out, how do we do this in a sustainable fashion to provide that more real-time and continuous assurance to our stakeholders.
Oh, awesome. I love that. I think that's where it's got to go. You mentioned just being sort of this continual model of continuous audit, and just really being the stakeholders and sort of the first party stakeholders, as opposed to, from my experience has been, okay, there's an audit, you've got requirements, and they've passed along maybe two different groups. So if we bring folks from audit in as sort of first party stakeholders of the system, of your delivery system, and make sure that everybody understands, well, this is actually what's happening, I think it's going to improve it. And that way we won't be trying to solve the wrong problems. I'm not saying we are, but I think we're solving a lot of the right problems.
You want to know and say, internal audit, is
that's right,
is on board with this. And not, I want to be clear that internal audit doesn't make the requirements. So it's not like we're hiding over here saying, I have all the answers to the test. It's through questions to understand what policies have a tolerance for some things passing through and what have zero tolerance, and what types of software or types of changes need to follow this versus don't need to. And that's not an audit call to make, but it's really understanding, what are the organization's requirements. And then there's also no stamp of approval that internal audit has either. A lot of times people will say like, we want audit stamp of approval on that. I'm like, oh man, they didn't issue me one of those. I don't have one. I can provide you assurance, I can provide you advice, but I can't say this is 100% good because that's not our role.
Excellent.
I would comment on one thing you're saying here. I'm looking at something here. So, Robert, Clarrissa, I think we should get rid of the word continuous compliance. I think it's misleading. First off, to be compliant is a state, right? It's an outcome. It describes something. Really, what you're talking about, and this is I'll always talk about this probably in every episode, Clarrissa. Assurance versus insurance. If you think about auditing, and Robert, you think about the automated governance, what it's doing is it's automating the assurance process.
Sure.
And I was on a podcast just yesterday with Bright Talk, and I was speaking with Helen on the Value Stream Consortium, and defects. You know what's funny? Let's get rid of the buzzwords. Policy is code, compliance is code, continuous compliance is. Talk about what it is. It's real-time assurance and treating these compliance expectations as a defect. And so if you start to look at it from that perspective, and I think this is a change on, it's a slight change on verbiage, but I think it's how many people in the organization look at not being compliant as being a defect. They could be like, my system works, but for some reason, I don't meet this control. Because I don't meet the control, it means my system's defective, regardless of if a customer can use it or not. And so I think that as you start thinking about automating the governance, and it comes down to assurance. And I think assurance is big because you talk about the 3 lines of defense, like configuration management is to ensure. Like that's things you can do at the first line. But what you're doing with automated governance is on the second line is you're providing assurances to the organization that the org is doing what they're doing, that they're not drifting from the expectations, and if they do drift, that they have some some explainable, reasonable reason to do it. So I think that's like as I'm letting you guys go through this, I feel like I don't want to be pedantic about the words, but recently I've been really evaluating the words because like I looked at where the continuous compliance and policies code come from.
Yeah,
a lot of this is just driven by vendors,
sure.
And a lot
we
of
don't need the words.
Yeah.
What we need is software. We need good software. We need these. We need to meet. I also don't want to use this the wrong word. We need to meet the contract that we're making. Like, is the compliance a contract, or is the policy a contract?
Yeah.
Are the developers looking at it like, hey, you've entered into this agreement to build this thing that looks this way, and we free of defects and free of security vulnerabilities and all these things. Really, that's what we're doing, right? So we need to make sure that we're living within the sort of the boundaries of that agreement, and I think that's what this is, and it's an assurance that that's happening.
And I also think too, when we think about it just from a compliance perspective, I think we often lose sight of other risks. So those policies are put in place as a bare minimum, typically from a security perspective, and for some operational risks. But if you think about at its base form, we want to get software to end users so they can do what they need to do with it. We also want to make sure that it doesn't go down, or people don't steal data, or whatever other like vulnerabilities and other things breaking. But you also have risks that, is the item going to do what we want it to do? So is this app going to crash when the clients click on it, or is it going to take them to the wrong place? So like, I think, yes, the compliance piece of it is kind of table stakes and that baseline. And maybe if we can automate all of those table stakes, then we can focus on some of these other risks. But it's super important not to forget about other risks, or maybe we can automate some of those other risks too. But when we think about it just from a compliance perspective, it sounds we start to think of very check the box and not thinking through what are we trying to accomplish, what could get in the way of us accomplishing that, and how are we going to manage that risk of things going wrong. Is just a thought that I'm having through this conversation.
Awesome.
I like that. Like it comes down to the assurance instead of compliance. Assurance is broader. Let's assure that what we're doing is meeting these sets of expectations. Robert, you call it a contract. And I think to the degree people have to be explicit, like the thing about governance, you have to state what you're doing, and then you basically validate you're continuously doing what you're supposed to be doing. A lot of people just don't state what they're doing in a clear, communicable way. With that being said, we are getting close to time. So I like to get some interesting lessons learned. 3 things you could probably give not probably 3 things you can give the audience if you learned something today, something you learned. I want to end on Robert. So Clarrissa, what are 3 things that, based on this conversation you've heard today between yours and Robert's conversation, that you could offer the listeners and 3 takeaways?
3 things that I learned. Number 1, this automated governance is awesome. I love that there are real use cases out there, that it's it's like, there's use cases out there, but actually to talk to somebody who has had experience in multiple different industries, even in the regulated industry. So that was something that was kind of a surprise to me. Of this is successful, not just from I didn't think it would not be successful from an actual implementation perspective, but from the mindset perspective. Just from we're a regulated industry, it's really tough to do things. Usually the mindset is we can't do that, rather than how can we do this and still. So that was really awesome to learn. The other piece of it is there are individuals that do want to bring audit in earlier, and I want you to be empowered to be able to do that, because you're spot on with, let's have that conversation sooner rather than later. And then the other piece, not necessarily that I learned, but just the reinforcement, which is kind of heartbreaking for me as an auditor, of the mindset that is still out there of, we don't want to bring the auditors in, and no, let's just hope that they don't come. Those are my words, not your words, but that is still a perception that I'm really want, and that's part of what I want control freaks to do as well, is try to dash that perception.
Alrighty.
Awesome. Thanks.
Robert, how about you, man? Let's close it out with you.
Well, first, no, thanks again for really having this conversation. I have learned a lot, and really, I'm just excited to have this conversation. It gets me thinking about a lot of things that I just really want to dive deeper into. So, a few of those things that we talked about. One of the first things that comes to mind is that audit is way more human than we look at it as, right? It's way more of a something that ought to be human interaction, and there ought to be an understanding, rather than this, there, like you said, it's not just some check boxes at the end of the day. And I do think that we do need to bring this together. I think with the dev teams, I think you really validated that more than I was anticipating, is that there just really does need to be more of that conversation sooner. I think, and Bill, you mentioned with sort of the idea of governance and engineering, and making sure that this is a sort of a formalized solution, in the enterprise. It really puts the importance or the emphasis back on something that's not just an afterthought, right? We need to put this part of our day-to-day life, just to make sure that we're holding our end of the bargain for that assurance piece. Like, this is how we prove that we're doing the right thing, and everybody can trust it. So those are really the larger things that I kind of took away from the conversation, and that really ultimately, this is the last thing, is because you have this platform to talk about it, that this stuff is really important, that others are really interested in it too. So I think that's another thing I took away, is that we just need to keep this conversation moving, and just love to be part of it. Thanks.
Well, yeah, thank you very much for coming on. Clarrissa, thanks again for the great questions. And Robert, one last thing. If anybody wanted to reach out to you, contact you, ask you some questions, what's the best way to get a hold of you? Is it LinkedIn? How would ping you on Twitter? LinkedIn? Yeah,
LinkedIn's probably the best. Robert Kelly DFW, and Robert at liatrio.com. You can get me on LinkedIn all day. I appreciate it.
Awesome.
All right.
Thanks, Robert.
That being said, we'll try this again, although we haven't rehearsed it, right? Every time, be a freak,
not a foe.
Oh, there we go.